Now, my first guest, the last time we were together was in Rome, as it happens. Bree Dale is a correspondent from the Daily Wire, but also an independent investigative journalist. Bree, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's so good to see you again under these circumstances, of course, but hopefully again in Rome soon.
Right. I mean, it's interesting circumstances, isn't it? Because, of course, Pope Francis has just died, so may his soul rest in peace. And the church is officially in a period of mourning for the next few days. But of course, the conversation is all on who will be the next Bishop of Rome. And lots and lots of speculation. I've just come across a very interesting website called collegeofcardinalsreport.com, which highlights all of the cardinals that are papable, but also all of the ones that are cardinal electors, so all the cardinals that will be there in the next conclave. What are your initial thoughts, firstly, on the passing of Pope Francis?
Well, looking back, there's a saying in Italian, when you have a fat pope, then comes the thin pope. And what they mean by this is there is a pattern that seems to come up where there will be a pope that is innovative or focused on the arts or the humanities or like a big spender or more humanist. And then you end up having elevated the next pope would be someone who's more traditional, orthodox, a little bit thinner, a little bit more on the how can I say it? Just more on the orthodox side versus more quote unquote progressive. But I join with Michael Knowles, who said the other day it's really hard to put or implement the idea of left or right Calvin onto this ancient establishment, which is the church. It's human beings are more complex. And so when I look at Pope Francis, I think I look at the fact that there was a huge push during his conclave to get someone in by clear heterodox cardinals to push an agenda and a progressive quote unquote agenda. And no matter how much the press tried to push for that, no matter how much they skewed their headlines to say, for example, that he approved gay marriages, etc., it never happened. It never happened. I think that that's a gift and a grace, and it shows that, as Hilaire Belloc once said, that no matter how much we see in the knavish imbecility of the running of this church, the church and God will remain established as he promised.
Right, because the Holy Spirit protects the church, and
Right.
one might say that even if there is a bad pope, he is limited on what he can do in terms of doctrine, because the
Right.
infallibility of the pope means that if he's speaking ex cathedra, he has to be speaking the truth, and the Holy Spirit
Which
would.
rarely happens,
Right.
right? It rarely happens. The last time it was the declaration, I think, of the Assumption.
Well, I think it's happened like
For
twice
Yeah,
since the doctrine
they
of
don't
papal
want to be in
infallibility.
that position,
But
right? Yeah.
the point I'm making is that a bad pope can stretch the bounds, can push
Yes.
to the boundaries, but can't actually break those rules. And so many people are saying that Pope Francis was a bad pope for that reason. So yes, on the one hand, he didn't push gay marriage, well, because he can't. He physically, ontologically can't. However, he did push fiducia supplicans, which confuses things. And so on the one hand, you have the confusion
Right.
coming out of the Vatican, and on the other hand, you have the liberal press who are trying to twist things and make it appear.
Which they helped. They
Right.
helped with that confusion. And in fact, Fiducia Supplicans, which is the document that came out that spoke about blessing irregular unions and couples who may be in
Well, just that,
situations like homosexual unions.
the language there was a
Yeah,
problem, wasn't it? It was like, it's not couples, it's unions, or is it the other way around? It's like,
right.
what does that
Right.
mean?
Why do we have to be so obscure? And I think that the point is that people, and including the church, weren't aware of what was going on in Germany that warranted the Pope. The Pope felt warranted to have to strike back in such a universal document, because the German church, the bishops were thumbing their nose at the authority of the Pope. In fact, I would say the German church, I am shocked that they haven't been declared in schism.
Why does heresy
truly.
always come out of Germany?
I mean, really, truly. I mean, and the fact of the matter is that the money. I mean, I don't know why people don't understand like the scandal. No matter all of the virtue signaling coming out of leftist German politics, why that tax that takes money directly out, like Social Security, out of the faithful's pockets for just identifying as Catholic. That tax was established by Hitler. Why that has not been nulled? And I think that that's where I mean, we take a look at the people. If you want to be buried or married in the church in Germany, you have to pay that tax. And if you don't want to pay the tax, Calvin, you have to go to the government office and renounce your faith. Like this is a no joke situation that I don't know why that's not top news scandal,
Mm.
except for the fact that the German bishops who are heterodox rather, and who have been pushing this nonsense against Pope Francis. I mean, you should see the responses that they have said to Pope Francis. Like, but
Well,
the
that's
problem
another
is
issue,
that
Bree, because
yeah,
Pope Francis would clamp down on any traditionalists
right,
that would, take, for example, Cardinal Burke. He would remove him from the Vatican, or Bishop Strickland. He would remove him from his diocese.
right,
However, the Orthodox, sorry, the Orthodox ones are getting clamped down upon really
right.
ardently, whereas the heterodox bishops, particularly the ones in Germany, didn't suffer any consequences. What's going
Right.
on there?
So I do think that this has to deal with the Jesuit influence around him, and I'm glad that that Jesuit influence is no longer there because most of those were not cardinals, although he has several who he established as voting cardinals who will be there. Fernandez being one. But the Jesuit influence, such as Father Martins from the United States and the South American Jesuit influence that he allowed to kind of do there was a parallel press office in the Vatican that was fairly well known to be established. That was kind of at the head was Father Antonio Spadero, who had the direct communication from the Pope. So whenever the Pope wanted some kind of like to stir the water, so to speak, Spadero was the one to push out a lot of these like leaks and press leaks to the leftist press. And it made the Vatican press office extremely frustrated. In fact, it was almost as if the Vatican press office was completely cut off from the Pope. Oftentimes, on what the popes, and we saw this with all of the PR nonsense that they had to deal with. I will tell you that the Pope's idea of making a mess, he did within the Vatican, but I would say he was a complicated character in that even if his posterity and his I mean, frankly, I do think that what's going to hit very hard in his legacy is how he treated traditionalists. And we could go on about that because I don't think it's also good policy or tactics when you don't have any of the power to to cause a stir as the American traditionalists have done, put a target on their back. I mean, I think we could learn from the Eastern Church and the suffering church in Africa when that takes place. But
Well, I
I
think
also
just
think
on that
that
point, I
yeah,
think that's God making good of a bad situation. So Traditionis Custodes was suppression of
right,
the traditional mass, the mass of the age,
right,
and I think that was a bad thing that
it
Pope
was.
Francis did. However, by being genuinely persecuted, by being genuinely oppressed, the traditional faith is growing, and so this is
Yes,
God turns bad into good, and so maybe
yes,
it will thrive now. But we do need a pope that will restore, even
right.
even just to the degree that Pope Benedict did in allowing it, whilst not promoting it. But I think promoting the traditional Latin Mass would be a good thing.
I concur, and in fact, I look at what I've been seeing from individuals who I have followed who are so-called traditionalists, and some of those individuals actually formed this website, which we could talk about. But there seems to be a tendency, and I'm sure you've seen this in the church, in the West in particular, that if you're not feeling persecuted, potentially you make up ways of being persecuted. I think it's a really bad a
Of
tendency.
Western society.
It's in society too, but it's really bad in the church if we're doing that because we should be seeking virtue and acting virtuously. period, point blank, and not see ourselves as victims. And I think that there is money to be made in the victimhood. We see this also within society as a whole. There's money to be made in the victimhood, and I fear that we're seeing that with several people. I've actually said some of those individuals who have the podcasts out there who really kind of have focused their entire life on Pope
Let's not
Francis
go on. Let's
are
not to
well,
individuals, but I hear you
yeah,
entirely.
yeah,
I'm a strong supporter of the traditional Latin Mass.
right. Me
However,
too.
the traditional
Yeah,
Latin Mass community, the rad trads, can be some of the most toxic people in the Catholic Church, and that is
yeah.
because they have this victimhood mentality. It's very similar. I often paint parallels to BLM. You know, it's
Yes,
but
exactly the
but
same
that's what has to
mentality.
be avoided. But
Yes,
we mentioned fiducia supplicans,
yes.
traditionalis custodes, amoris laetitia was another one. You know, the family, the divorce. So
The
all of these,
Chinese deal, that to me is
the Chinese deal, yeah,
the biggest because of those who have really truly suffered in the suffering church in China, including, Cardinal Zen, who is a huge supporter of the traditional Latin Mass, and super balanced and really, in my opinion, a living saint and super, super authentic too. He doesn't cut corners. He has advocated for Christians who have been imprisoned in Hong Kong, like Catholics, like Jimmy Lai being one of them. Not one word during this pontificate was said about those who suffered in Hong Kong, and that is due to Cardinal Parolins and Pope Francis's secret deal with the CCP. And that's where we start to go into the papabili, the people who are being kind of put forward as like around the water cooler of those who might be considered for the papacy. But I do want to make this very clear. I've been to multiple conclaves. I was there when John Paul II died. I was there for the elevation of Ratzinger. I will tell you, not one media pundit, not one got it right. Not one like betting office got it right. And I think that that is the mystery of the conclave itself, is that I believe that the Holy Spirit does work in mysterious ways, especially when it comes to the influence of these very, very new cardinals that have come in to the College of Cardinals under Pope Francis. They just haven't met one another.
Thank you for watching my Common Sense Crusade. If you'd like to watch the whole show, you can subscribe to lotuseaters.com for as little as £5 per month, and then you get access to a bank of content as well. My show is 3 p.m. every Thursday. See you there. Deus Vult.